All right. Welcome back to part two, where I speak to Daniel about more about his studies and what he's up to currently. So, mate, you're currently doing engineering and commerce. Like, what made you want to get into that field specifically? Was it out of high school? You just sort of knew that you wanted to do engineering and business, or was that something more of like a hunch? Or yeah,
Yeah, look, I think in retrospect, it seems like it was really obvious, but I think it was a bit of a gamble at the time. I didn't actually really know what engineering was. I think when you're in high school, it sounds cool, but do you really know what engineering is, or even like any degree? Really, you don't really fully understand it. But I think I'd, um, I guess I'd grown up, and as I was growing up, I loved to fiddle around with things. I'd grab computers from the hard waste, and I'd try and build better computers. And
really,
yeah, they're like, I don't know if you have it in Sydney, but
yeah.
when people sort of like just throw out their furniture and their computers on the side of the street.
Mm. Hmm.
Yeah, I used to go around as a kid. I'd like find all the computers and grab a set of screwdrivers and pull them apart and sort of see if I could build a better computer. And it used to be a lot of fun. Um, pull apart old VCRs,
Yeah.
like video machines, and try and get the motors out and see if I could get the motors to work and all that kind of stuff. So I think, in a way, I was kind of wired that way from a young age. And then when I went through high school, did all the science
Mm.
subjects, and I think my parents kind of like, oh, maybe engineering would be a good fit, and I was like, yeah, okay, like it sounds good. Uh,
I
so
think you were born
yeah,
to be an engineer, mate. If you were like pulling apart like VCRs and computers and trying to make them better,
yeah. I mean,
that
I don't
was
know,
the only
maybe
path.
yeah. But I think when I was in early high school, like I don't know if I would have necessarily been like, oh man, I really want to be an
Yeah.
engineer. It just kind of came naturally later. Yeah, and I think with the commerce, I was always interested in the engineering, but also interested in the business side of things, and maybe startups, and I guess most engineering and technical development is going to happen within the context of a company, or some kind of organization that has budgets and needs
Mm,
to market itself and bring in money and make sure it's not all that kind of stuff.
mm,
So I thought that by learning about the business side of things, it would sort of allow me to leverage my technical engineering side of things a bit more.
mhm.
And I think that actually kind of has somewhat eventuated, where having that business mindset is really really helpful in a engineering context. So yeah, it's a good
What?
degree. I'd recommend it.
Definitely. I think it's like one of the best combinations. You get the technical expertise, but also I guess, the more business side and sort of interpersonal skills that come with business. So
That's right. Yeah.
yeah, 100%. And I think, would you agree that, or your thoughts on this, but like because you do have experience both with the technical side and the soft skill side, would you think or say one is more important than the other, or is there like a good balance to have depending on the role, or just from your experience, like which has been harder to actually develop and like implement in the workplace?
Yeah. No, it's a good question. I think in doing both engineering and business is really good because you get exposed to a bit of both. And I think in the engineering world, you often be in an engineering lab at uni, and I mean it's not actually just it's actually pretty true that a lot of people aren't really able to communicate, and they're not very confident socially and things like that. And so it is a genuine thing that these people that have these brilliant technical abilities aren't
Mm,
necessarily able to sort of articulate what they're doing or build relationships with other people. And I think actually in sort of the workplace and in industry, it's really important to be able to do things, to be able to write a piece of code or design an like an electronic circuit or something like that. But without being able to actually communicate what you're doing, or have a network of people who you can bring along with you, uh, you're not necessarily going to be able to make the most of it. So I think, yeah, by doing business as well, I was able to get involved in, I guess, things like 180 degrees consulting. And I don't know if you have that in Sydney, sort of
yeah,
a,
we do, we do.
yeah, student volunteering, voluntary consulting kind of club.
Mm,
And that really helped me to develop that side of my skill set. So
mm,
I mean, I think I was always, able to be social, but sort of being able to give a presentation and engage with clients and work with other people in a really collaborative way on a meaningful project,
Yeah.
something like 180 degrees, which I probably wouldn't have been exposed to if I was only an engineering student, sort of helped to round that out.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That's awesome, mate. Yeah, and just risking that, people have been hearing about COVID-19 way too much, but I guess we'll keep it brief. But like us graduating, because I'm graduating in December, you're graduating in November.
Yeah.
Well, that's the plan, anyways. And yeah, what do you think about the current climate for these graduates finding a job and yeah, just like us coming out of university and during this time? Like, what are your general thoughts on that? And do you have any just advice or what has been really helpful for you navigating this interesting time?
Yeah, it's such an interesting time to graduate. I think, I mean, if you'd said to me at the beginning of my degree that I was going to graduate during the first recession in 30 years, I would have been like, that like maybe I should
Fantastic.
just drop out, but I don't think it's all doom and gloom. I think
Yeah.
obviously a lot of my friends and so on have found that they've been applying for jobs and then they just won't hear back and the company's not hiring and things like that. And so I think there's definitely less opportunities out there in a sort of formal sense. But I think it's not necessarily all doom and gloom. I think actually because of this situation, there's so much change happening, and when we come out of COVID, which is inevitable, and I think that's a good thing to remember, is it's going to end and things are going to get back to normal. I think there's going to be a huge amount of opportunity because there's going to be, society will have changed, businesses will have changed the way they do things. There'll be a lot of gaps in the market from companies that have closed down, and so I think actually for graduates who are more, I guess, entrepreneurial and can see opportunities, there's actually going to be a lot of potential to do some really cool things. Yeah, I guess in terms of advice, look, it's not easy. I think you just got to plug away and apply it stuff. But
Yeah.
I guess, look, probably people shouldn't be afraid to look outside of the typical things they were aiming for. Like if they were thinking, I want to go into the big four, accounting firms, I think it's better to cast the net more broadly and to get an opportunity and then use that to, continue to progress your career and then, later on switch to where you want to go rather than sort of being fixated on one thing and then being really disappointed if you didn't end up there. So, yeah.
Great advice, mate. And being adaptable, I think during this time is definitely key. And yeah, I think even if you can't get into, let's say, like your example, the big four, there's other ways. If that was your ultimate goal, working in a smaller firm, building up experience in a different industry, and then coming back into that field is definitely a way. But you actually touched on being a lot more entrepreneurial, looking at the startup space as well, and you're currently in there as an intern in the startup space. So yeah, what has been your experiences so far working at this startup, and could you tell us a little bit more about what you're currently doing?
Yeah, sure. So
Yeah.
I'm working at a startup at the moment called Atmo Biosciences, and yeah, it's a pretty cool place. What we do is, I guess, there's a lot of people in the world who have issues with their gastrointestinal system, so things like irritable bowel disease and so on. And the problem with these kind of diseases is there's not really a good way to diagnose it at the moment. So you kind of either shove something up the sort of the back of people and detect various things, which is
Not
pretty
very pleasant.
invasive and uncomfortable kind of operation.
Yeah.
Or you measure the sort of the gases that people breathe out, but by the time the gases have left, I guess all the way down in their
Comes back up.
yeah, like in their bowel, and it's come all the way back out through their mouth, the concentrations of that are going to be very low, and so the accuracy of that measurement is quite low. So what we do at Atmo Biosciences is we've developed a little capsule which you swallow, and as it travels through your gastrointestinal system, it's constantly recording the level of different gases and then transmitting that sort of outside the body for analysis. And so the idea is it's a bit of like a it's fairly groundbreaking in that no one's done this before. So we're not quite sure, what the correct answer is in terms of mapping the measurements to different diseases and so on. But the idea is that if we can measure the gases at various parts of the digestive system in a sort of non-invasive, fairly comfortable, easy way, that might make it much easier for people with these issues to be, diagnosed and have appropriate treatment. So yeah, it's very cool.
Wait. So I just trying to wrap my head around things. There's a pill that you swallow it, and then it will transmit all the data to like your phone or like computer or like what's happening in your bowels or like your intestines. Is that right?
Yeah, that's pretty much it in
Wow.
sort of a simplistic view of it. Yeah.
Hmm.
Um,
So yeah, that's interesting because last year, I believe it was last year, I was in Hong Kong and I was working on a project with HSBC and Accenture in a group project, and we had to find initiatives around like the smart city ecosystem. Smart cities is basically just trying to, in a nutshell, trying to find ways of how to make a city more efficient and smart and interconnected. So one of the things that we thought of was a med tech solution for cardiovascular disease patients, mostly elderly. And in Hong Kong, you've been to Hong Kong, I'm
yeah,
assuming.
love
Yeah,
Hong Kong. It's a great
yeah,
place.
amazing. Um, and I guess one of the highlights of Hong Kong is like the big high rises, right? And everyone's living super close together, super packed. And so, like, getting to the hospital is one thing. Detecting and like living in such small places as well, you'd never know if you do have like the disease, like if anything could happen. So we created a device or proposed a device that would monitor your heart rates and all those vitals. I mean, they'll go to, I guess, a database or just be monitored. And then if there was any irregularities or they could sense any issues with the heart, or if it was they were experiencing, let's say, like a heart attack, they could automatically notify like emergency services to come to that patient, or alternatively, if they would go to the doctor and the doctor could just load up the data of how their heart was going, or just like a report. That's like the proposal. Obviously, feasibility issues and like the technology is up for, I guess, development. But yeah, I think the well, from my perspective as well, and living with like my grandma, I think like the technology around medtech is just super interesting and something that is definitely crucial for obvious reasons, but is not really paid a lot of attention enough. So yeah, that's really cool what you're doing right now, man.
Yeah, no, and I think it is interesting because there's kind of in the world of technology, there's almost two levels of sort of technological work,
Mm,
and I think the first thing is like, just the implementation. Like, can we get something that you know attach to people and collect the information and send it to the some kind of database and things
yeah,
like that.
yeah,
And then the more higher level thinking is actually coming up with that idea. And I think at the moment, the way things are, that like most of the ground level technology actually exists. So all these ideas that people have, are really possible, and you just kind of need enough time and money to get people to do the nitty gritty details. But I think the really exciting place to be is in that kind of, in that space where you were, where you're coming up with the ideas. And I think that's much more valuable in many ways than being the nitty gritty details person who's writing the lines of code and communicating with the database and so on. Being the visionary who can see how to put all those pieces together. I think that's like it's an exciting kind of position to be in.
yeah, mate. I think it's super. Yeah, I think because of obviously we all hear about like the aging population, and there's going to be in certain countries there's going to be more people over the age of 65 than people under it. I don't think Australia is going to be that bad. Correct me if I'm wrong, but yeah, I think obviously with issues happening around like the aged care system right now, and yeah, just like how we're going to live after retirement, right? Like we don't think about these things very often.
Yeah.
But like when I'm like 80, I don't know what I'm going to be doing. I'd like to think that I would like to live in like a house that is like super futuristic. Everything's monitored for me, and I can just like
Yeah.
talk to my house and just like just do everything for me, right? Obviously, that's not what we. That's not the 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 world we live in right now. But I wouldn't be surprised in when we're like 80, let's say 60 years from now, we're all going to be living in such a world. So it's exciting to see and think about.
Yeah, definitely. And I think particularly in the med tech space, there's the industry is almost ripe for disruption
Mm,
in a lot of ways. And I think
mm,
what kind of happens is you have like consumer electronics and things like Facebook and smartphones, and because there's less regulation, people can kind of just do what they want and they push forward very quickly, and you sort of end up with advances in rapid periods of time. But in the medtech space, you've got this weird dichotomy between the technological innovators and the doctors and the regulators and all those kind of complicating factors. And so what happens is, for example, doctors have a certain way of doing things, and they're sort of stuck in their way. And then if people might have a really good idea, but then they've got to do a heap of work and regulation to make sure that people can use it, and then they've also got to convince the doctors to use it. And so I think what it means is that there's all these amazing potential ideas, like you're talking about, with putting everything in your house monitors everything you do and make sure that you stay alive when you're old and all that kind of stuff. But there's these barriers to actually sort of implementing that. And the technology's there, but sort of
mm.
the ideas and the regulation and the sort of culture in the medical fields, to the appetite for it, is not always there, which I think that gap, that gap provides quite an opportunity for people who are willing to go there. So yeah.
Yeah, I find that dichotomy very interesting as well. Like a smartphone, the innovation is always going on like every year, and we're all excited about it. People lining up in front of certain companies' stores overnight to get the new phones, but we're not as interested about the innovations for our own health in the future. I
Yeah.
find that so puzzling, and I think your point about the regulations and the hurdles that need to be overcome for it to be, I guess, widely accepted, like the my health record, right, with the
Yeah.
Australian government. People are just going bananas about that, and that's very simple, right? Just like getting your health record online or on a database. Imagine having monitors in your house, and what the chaos is going to be for if they're going to make, or the government, not the government, but it's going to be a big like accepted mainstream thing. I can only imagine. Well, I can't imagine because it's going to be insane, but can only imagine how that's going to play out in the future.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's a lot of inertia in these kind of industries, and I think it's been interesting with COVID
Hmm.
how quickly things have had to change. Sort of
Yeah,
certain industries like the university sector, the healthcare sector.
yeah,
I think they've had to do more change in a week than they've done in the previous 10 weeks, or sorry, 10 years. 10
yeah,
years.
100%.
They've suddenly had to telehealth and online classes, things like that. And so I think when I was talking earlier about what graduates can do to make the most of COVID-19, I think it's like finding those kind of those areas where there's been a lot of disruption, and finding the value you can add to help people through that process, I think is a really good sort of good place.
I agree. I think I'm gonna butcher this quote, but like I think it's like necessity really like breeds and like gives a way for like entrepreneurship, and I think that's definitely in a lot of developing countries where there's so much entrepreneurship and social enterprises all sort of concentrated in those areas because they need to, right? They need to live and they need to do all of these initiatives. But in Australia, it's because I think we're just living such a comfortable life. I think only a disruption like COVID-19 will actually bring out a lot of the entrepreneurship in that sense. But yeah, working at a startup must be very fast paced and interesting. You've worked at more traditional, bigger legacy companies. Has there been a difference working at a startup as compared to a more traditional company? And yeah, what are your experiences so far, if you were to compare them?
Yeah, I think working at a startup is a fantastic experience. I guess when you're at a big company,
Yeah.
things move quite slowly. You have a very defined kind of role and I guess expectations of what you're doing, and sort of you're maybe fulfilling sort of keeping the company going day to day, day to day operations, keeping things ticking along. I think at a startup, it's just crazy intense because you've got to move so quickly. There's never enough time. There's never enough money, and so even when you're a young junior member of the team like me, there's a lot of opportunity to contribute and to I guess add value to the team and just be involved in everything. And I think one of the things that appeals to me is, and when I've worked in bigger companies before, you get to see, I guess, a really small part of the picture. Maybe you're part of the team that manages the database, or whatever, like small part of the big company. I think there's some great learning opportunities there. But I found being at a startup this year, I guess, because the entire team's fairly small and we're all working together every day, I just get to see the whole spectrum of what's going on. I get to hear about conversations that the CEO is having with potential investors. I get to hear about what the mechanical engineers are doing and the clinical trials and all this kind of good stuff. Just every day I'm talking to people about all those different facets of the business. And I think, it's really pushed me. I think I've done a lot of things in the past, but this experience has been probably one of the most interesting, but also one of the most challenging, in that the pace of the work and the expectation to contribute and get things done has been quite high. But I think being pushed in that way is a good way to learn and develop as well, because kind of learning by doing, like you were saying before with necessity and entrepreneurship. I think it's the same thing in a job, where if you really have to get things done, it's a good way to learn and develop. So yeah.
100%, 100%. There's 2 points I'd like to draw from that. I think I was speaking to, I believe it was a job recruiter, or it was a careers manager, a careers consultant, and they actually stressed the point about how recruiters and companies are looking now, not so much about things that are on your CV, very refined, your marks, the subjects that you did. It's more about they would actually, in an interview, be a lot more interested in, let's say, if you started a company or you worked at a startup, because it shows a different side of, I guess, a lot of students don't do that, obviously, but it shows like a different side of, I guess, how they are, where they're very gritty, they're very adaptable, and they're able to see like the bigger picture, which is, being able to see the bigger picture is obviously very valuable, if you can actually be focused and be able to work in and be able to do the smaller things as well. So really interesting point with that. And I think the second point was how lucky we are about we're able to work with startups now. I think I may be wrong, maybe like 20 or 30 years ago, if we were to graduate now, I don't think startup would be on the top of our minds, right? We'd probably be going into the big companies that we see on billboards or in the city or on buildings. So it's an exciting time to be graduating, if we were to spin it a bit more optimistically.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think to summarize what it's like to work for a startup, I know, Andrew, you're into your hackathons and things like that. Working at a startup is kind of like a 24/7 hackathon, it's literally that kind of vibe, where there's ideas going around everywhere, there's things that need to be done, there's pressure, there's deadlines, there's great, overwhelming euphoric successes, and really crushing and frustrating failures as well. So I think that sort of journey, similar to a hackathon, but over a more long period of time, it's tiring and challenging, but it's really rewarding as well.
Yeah, hopefully not all aspects of a hackathon, like sleepless nights, big arguments, big disagreements.
I sleep. Yeah, well, I think, I mean, obviously not quite those things, but it does bring out the similar, the really robust discussion about what
Definitely
you should do next and things like that. And I think in the place I'm at now, it's really great, and the team is really switched on and experienced. And I think sometimes, obviously, in hackathons with uni students and stuff, tensions come to the fore and people have different perspectives. But in my case, the team's really fantastic. So
yeah,
yeah,
definitely agree, mate. Yeah, well, the project sounds amazing. What you're working at the startup and everything that's going on outside of uni, and your career path as you graduate this year. I'm really keen to see and hear about what you're going to be doing next, Daniel. So just want to thank you for coming on the podcast and to share your insights and thoughts on working at a startup and that side of, I guess, STEM. And hopefully I'll be able to see you again in the future when we're all able to travel. I'll probably dip over to Taiwan, and if you're there, we'll definitely catch up, mate.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, thanks for having me, Andrew. It's such a great initiative you've got with this podcast, promoting the new Colombo plan and letting people share their stories. I think I've enjoyed listening to a lot of the previous episodes you've done, and it's great to hear from people that I shared my NCP experience with, and people that I, either they came and visited me in Taiwan or I went and visited them in their location. And so to hear them on your podcast and hear their stories is really uplifting to me as well. I've really enjoyed that, as well as hopefully people are encouraged to apply and pursue the new content as well. So
Yeah, I wish
good.
everyone luck for the 2021 cohort that are applying right now. And hopefully a lot of the stories and the advice that, obviously from Daniel, but also the other scholars as well, will be helpful for you. So thanks for your time, mate, and I'll speak to you soon. And everyone wants to reach out to Daniel, I'll give a link to Daniel's LinkedIn as well.
Happy to chat to people about startups or New Colombo plan or Taiwan. I'd love to talk about all those things. So
Awesome,
feel free
mate.
to get in touch.
Awesome. Thank you.